All right, good afternoon, everyone. Give me 1 second to share my screen and we will get started. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about functions. Now, these functions are not the user-defined ones. These are the embedded functions that exist in SQL. With these functions, you have to understand which one it applies to, depending on the data type. Right? So a function that works with a data type will not work with a integer data type, or you will get a result that is very kind of unexpected. Okay. So the first thing you want to do before you apply any functions is to understand the data type of the field. So first set of functions we're going to talk about are the string functions. Now, the string functions are actually very robust because technically every data type can be converted into a string. And because SQL does that kind of automatically, you can technically use string functions to any column. Okay, so even if it is a datetime column, you can still use, let's say, trim or substring, okay, to the datetime column itself. Now, it's not preferred because you do want to use the correct functions, right? And the output of a string function will always be a string. Right? So if you want to do any additional compute on top of the result, which we'll talk about when we talk about subqueries and window functions, right? When you do that, it doesn't work as well. Okay? Whereas a datetime function could return to you the year, for example, or the month as a numerical value. So if you do want to do any additional compute on top of that, it'll be a bit easier. Okay? So the first set of functions we look at today are the lower and upper functions. Okay? Just like its name, all it is doing is taking the strings in those columns, changing them to lowercase or changing them to uppercase. Okay? The syntax is very simple, right? All we have to do is put lower with the parentheses around the column name. Okay. Again, make sure the column name is a column that exists in the table. And if you get any errors that said column not defined or column not found, you may have made a spelling mistake in your column name. It's not because of the function itself. For the uppercase and lowercase, in SQL, it may not seem that big of a deal, right? Because most of SQL functionalities doesn't care about cases. Okay? However, when you are working with another language in conjunction with SQL, so for example, you are connecting a SQL database into a Python environment, right? Then the cases will matter. So instead of changing the cases in, let's say, Python, you can change it in SQL to prepare for ingesting into Python. Another thing I want to mention here is that even though there is a lower and uppercase, there is no proper case, right? So if we look at the original column here for customer name, right, this is what we call proper case, where each word, where each segment has a capital letter to begin with, and then all lowercase afterwards. Okay? However, in SQL, there is no function that directly does that for us. So we cannot just pass in a column of strings and just change it all into uppercase. We need to combine a few functions together to create the uppercase result. Okay. And hopefully by the end of today's session, you can have a basic idea of how to do that, okay? And take that as a challenge to change a string into a proper case. Okay. The next set of functions, or this next function I want to talk about is trim. Okay. And for those of you who are in the session last or yesterday, we saw that some strings will have white spaces, right? Both before and after the string. Trim is able to take away those white spaces, okay? And we can even define which side of the string to trim. Okay, so we could say trim both. So trim all the white spaces before and after, or can say trim just the before or trim just the after. Besides the white spaces, we can also define a set of characters for the function to trim. Okay, so in this example that we have on the screen here, right, our original product name has double quotes, right, surrounding the name itself. So we can say trim the double quote by just saying trim and then the substring here from our column. Okay. Now with trim is only going to kind of delete the characters or delete the white spaces until it means something that doesn't meet the criteria. So if we say trim double quotes and there were, let's say, 3 double quotes, it's going to trim them all, right? Until it sees a character that's not a double quote. Another thing is when you're passing a substring, it will be looking for the exact match to trim. So if we want to trim double quote and also single quote, we cannot put them all into one substring. We have to basically wrap it around. So kind of like a Russian doll, right? Nest them inside of each other to trim multiple different characters. Okay. Otherwise, if we put double quote followed by single quote, it's only going to look for that pattern, right? So if you see the double quote and single quote at the beginning, or double quote and single quote at the end, then you will trim it. Otherwise, it's going to skip that. With our trim here, you can see we can say leading or trailing. This will define whether it's before or after. Okay, so you can decide basically what characters you want to eliminate from your column. Now, the more versatile function in string is the substring function. Okay, so substring, like its name, just takes a chunk of the string and makes it into a new shorter string. Okay. The way that it works is that we can pass in 2 different parameters or 2 different values. Okay, the first value will be the starting position. The second value is the length of the substring. In SQL, it is a 1-index language, which means that the characters starts with index 1 and counts upwards, right? So if we look at, let's say, order ID here, or actually, let me look product ID since it's not confusing with the first one, right? The first 7 here has index 1, the second 7 has index 2, 8 has index 3, and so on and so forth. Right? So it starts with index 1 and then moves up. Okay. Again, this is different to some other programming languages where it has a 0 index to start. So this is something that you need to remember, especially if you're moving from, let's say, Python into SQL. Okay, so it's 1 index, not 0 index. Okay. The second thing is the second number is the length, right? Not the ending index. So if, let's say, I want to get the middle 83, for example, from product ID, I would say the start, so substring product ID, comma, right? The start index will be 3, 1, 2, 3, and then the length will be 2, right? 1 and 2. So it's not 3 and 4. Otherwise, you're going to get A3, A5. Okay. Again, this does get a bit of time to get used to it because some other languages do have a start and end as their parameters, but in SQL, the substring is start and the length, right? How many characters. For the length, it can technically be more than the number of characters that exist in the string. So if it is more, it doesn't fill the remaining spaces with white spaces. It just goes up to how many there is. Okay. So if we look at, let's say, the order ID column, okay, and let's say I want to get just from the second number to the end, right? So I can say substring order ID, comma 2, right? Starting with index 2, and then just give a big number. So let's say 5, right? So each of them does not have 5 additional characters, but it's just going to give you up to the end, basically, right? So the first one will have 4 characters, this one will just have 1 character, and so on and so forth. Okay? So you don't have to worry about defining a length that's too big, and then it has all white spaces. It's only going to give you as many as you could. Okay. Now for the like statement, we kind of mentioned this last time as well, but the like statement is a partial match. So it's looking for a pattern, right? Whereas most of the time when we do equal signs, it is exact match. So the entire string has to be exactly the same. Okay? However, sometimes we're not sure if the entire string is the way we want to look for it, right? Or we just want to look for a word that's in the string, but we're not sure where exactly it is. So then we can use the like keyword. Okay. With like, it always has this percentage sign, which is a wildcard, right? In its match. So even though I have percentage and the underscore, right? Most of the time we just use the percentage more than the underscore, right? So the difference between these two, the percentage can be any character, right? So any number of characters, either before or after, right? Whereas the underscore is a single character. So if it's 2 characters before the one that we have, then it's not a match. Okay. With the placement of the wildcard character, it will tell the match, right, how to look for the substring. So if we have it at the end, right, then the substring has to begin, the string has to begin with the substring that we define, right? If it's at the front, then you have to end with the substring that we define with. Okay. And if we have it both before and after, then just somewhere in the middle. Okay. So in this example, this advantage word is somewhere in the middle of the string. It could be before, right, at the beginning, could be at the end, but we just know that it's somewhere in the string. Now the next function is our replace function. Okay. So with our replace function, we first put in the column name. Okay. Then we put in the existing character that we want to replace, and we give the character that we want to replace it with. Okay, so the column, what we want to replace, what we want to replace it with. Okay. If you just want to do a simple deletion, right, you can just put an empty string, which is basically 2 single quotes back to back. Okay. And the difference between replace and trim, if you're wondering, is that replace will look for every instance of the substring that you defined inside of the column, right? Whereas trim only looks at the beginning and the end of the string. Okay. So in this case, when we have a double quote, right, it doesn't only focus on the beginning and the end, it focuses everywhere in the middle. So all the double quotes will be replaced with this empty string, which is kind of like a deletion. Now, similar to trim, replace is looking for the exact match of the substring, right? So if you want to replace more than one character or more than one substring, and they're not back to back, you had to nest it. So you had to do like replace or round replace with a different character. Okay, so if you have time today, I will show you an example of that, just to give you an idea, right? So it might not be the most efficient way to do this, but in SQL, this is the way that it is done. And for my last slide, so we have a very short slide today. We have our datetime functions. Now with datetime functions, I have to make a note that these are functions in MySQL. They may not translate to other SQL languages. Right? So some companies do use Oracle SQL or PostgreSQL or even SQLite, right? Those languages may not have the same functions inside. So if you are using the other languages, you may want to do a quick search, right? Just to say, what is the year function in PostgreSQL? Or what is the year function in Oracle SQL, right? Because again, these are more kind of tailored towards our MySQL language. Now, the day, year, and months are pretty self-explanatory, right? It just gives you the parts of our datetime string, right? So the day of the datetime, the year, the month of the datetime, and so on. Okay. The day of months is not used very often, just because it's very similar or basically does the same as the day function, right? So it tells you which day of the month it is, which is kind of the same thing it does with day function. Okay. But the day of week, it will give you, I believe, 0 to 6, right, of the day of week. Okay. There are a few other functions that will tell you the day of week as well. So I'll look to explain that today. Your purpose, if you are learning MySQL, is to know one of them. Okay, so there's weekday and then there's day of week. You don't need to know both because the way they number it, right, the corresponding numbering is different. So if you try to remember both of them, you may get confused. Okay, so just remember one of them, and it should help you. Okay. Similarly with the minute and hour, this only works when there's a daytime column, right? If it's just a day column, you're always going to get every 0, right? So 0 hour, 0 minute. Okay. If you do have a daytime, it's in the format of 4-digit year, 2-digit months, 2-digit day, all separated by a dash, and then a space, and then you have the hour with the 2 digits, the minutes with the 2 digits, and then the second with 2 digits. Sometimes you'll have a 4-digit like millisecond at the end as well. So depending on the columns that you use, the minute and hour function may not be anything significant. Okay. You can always use the now function to show the current daytime. Okay. But this is usually used when calculation is not really used to not used a lot in like analysis. Okay. So before I move on to the hands-on portion, are there any questions so far about the string functions or the datetime functions? Okay. In that case, just some more examples, but I think you should be able to find this slide later on. Okay. In that case, let's go to our hands-on portion. So just like yesterday, we have this URL that I can use. Okay. The data is the same as yesterday. So if you already have it, you don't have to download it again. If you don't have it, just click here and you download a text file or a SQL file onto your computer. Okay. And again, we're using db fiddle for my demonstration, but if you do have other MySQL editors, feel free to use those as well. Right? So if you have SQL Workbench installed, feel free to use SQL Workbench to follow along. Right? I'm using this just so that there's no installation involved, and we don't need to troubleshoot all of that. Okay? So for those of you who are new today, once you download the data, open it with a text editor, and just copy everything, and go to dbfiddle and paste it into the schema SQL portion. Okay, this will create a table for us. Okay, and again, you can click the run button to run the script. Okay, or if you're using Mac, it's Command Enter. If you're using Windows, it will be Control Enter. Okay, so just run the script, and you should see here briefly query successfully executed. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do today is just to practice our lowercase and uppercase, right? So I want to take our department names from our, I believe it's called the department table, right? And change them all into lowercase. Okay. So the simplest query, we just do a select, okay? And we'll just do lower with a parentheses or bracket, and then the name of the column, which is dep name, okay? From department. Oh, it's a department. There's no S, sorry. Right. And here we have all the department with lowercase. Now, something that you may notice with the output, right, is that the column name will be exactly what's in the select statement. So this doesn't look that pretty, especially if you're generating a report and you want to print it out later on. Right? This is not a nice display. So there is something called alias that we can use to beautify our column name. Okay, you can just leave a space after your column. Okay, and type as and then space again, and then write out the column name that you want. So let's say lower name. Okay. So you can see that our new column name will just be the alias that we have. Okay. The thing I want to remind you is with the alias, it should be one string. So one entire string. You can use kind of the Java syntax where the first word is lowercase, the second word is uppercase. You can use both word is uppercase. Okay. Or you can use the underscore middle. Okay, but try to keep it as one complete string. Okay. This is also to help you when you're referring to the column later on, right? Because it's one entire string, it's easier to refer to it. But if you do want it to be separate words, you just wrap around with the quotes. Okay, so it will be two words. Okay, but this is not recommended. Okay, even though it looks nicer, okay, it's not recommended, especially running more queries. But if you just want to do it for the presentation, maybe this is something you want to do. Okay. Now to answer the question in the chat, so how do we display all the column and apply our kind of lowercase, right, to the department name? So we could use select star with our department name. Okay, so let me show you this example. So we're going to do select lower dep name and then star from department. Okay, but what this will do is it will add an additional column, and the original column will be shown as well. Oops. Yeah, maybe I need to put star in before. Okay, so you had the original column, and you have the. Sorry, give me 1 second here. You have the new column where the lowercase is here. Okay? If you don't want the original column, you will just have to write out the other columns, which is again not something that you want to do in this case. Because if you do just want to have a newer display, we'll talk about this later on in another session where it's more advanced. We can update the table. Okay, but for now, you're just kind of looking at the table. Nothing is changed in the original data, right? So all the functions that you're writing here is kind of creating a new temporary table. It's not changing the original table, right? So even if we do lowercase and we do another select star later on, okay, you see that the column, it will still be what it looks like when you ingest the data. Okay, so we'll talk about how to update tables maybe in the future session. Okay, yeah. Any other questions before continuing? Okay. So the next question that we're looking at is how many employees have sales in their title? Right? So we just need to find sales in their title. It can be anywhere. Okay. So in this case, let me first show you the employees table first. And limit 5. Okay. So don't load in the entire table. Remember, if you just preview the table, add a limit. Okay. So here we have the job name. Okay. Some of them have salesman, but we're saying that maybe there are other sales somewhere else. So it might be salesperson. It might be just sales, right? So we want to include all of them. Okay. So to do that, let's just first print out our result. So we're going to do select star from employees, okay, where the column name, job name is like, right? Because we don't know exactly where this word sale is. Okay. And we can say it starts with sales. Let me delete that. Uh, type. Sorry, did I make a mistake here? Sorry, give me 1 second. Sales. What's going on? Uh, oh, yeah, thank you. But still, why is there should work? Okay, so for some reason I tested this before. Oh, I understand why now. Right, sorry, I understand why now. So the reason this is not giving us any output, it's not because the syntax is wrong. It's because, again, in our original data, there is a space in front of sales. That's why it's not giving us any data. I keep forgetting that. Okay, so with this syntax, the string has to start with sales, right? But in here, technically, there's a white space, so it doesn't start with sales. That's why I don't have any data, right? And if we put it at the end or at the beginning, this will say it ends with sales. So technically, we don't have anything end with sales. That's why there's no result. So if you wrap around both, right, it had to be somewhere inside the string. That's why now we're getting this. Okay, so sorry, that was my fault. I forgot the way that the data was. Okay, so nothing wrong with the query. It's just that the data has white spaces. Now the next one, we want to change this into capitalized case. Again, same thing with lowercase. So I'll just do a really quick one. So select uppercase. I think it's imp name from employees. Right? So it's all uppercase, even though it was originally all uppercase. Yeah, so we can do trim. Yes. So thank you, Kevin. So we can do the trim. So we can do select star from employees where trim of job name is like sales. So this works because it's first doing the trim by eliminating the white space before and after, and then it's looking for this pattern, right? Start with sales and then end with anything. Okay. So that's the next one, but we'll just skip that one, right? So we can just use trim on job name column to just get the name itself. Okay. So here, this is ones I want to look for, right? Which day of week had the most hires? Okay. So for our hires, we have a hire date. Okay. So we can do select. I'm just going to show you the daytime function first, okay? Or day of week first. So hire date, and then day of week, hire date from employees. Okay. So notice how these are all numerical. Okay. So it's 1 to 7 for day of week. Okay. There's another function in MySQL called weekday. Okay. And this one is actually 0 to 6. Okay. So there's two functions that will turn the day of week into numerical values. Okay. But the problem is for, especially for beginners, right? These numbers doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? So there's a third function I want to teach you, which is called day name. Okay. This will give you the actual name of the weekday, right? So we have Monday to Sunday in here, right? So if you're new to MySQL, choose one of them. So choose day of week or choose weekday and start by combining with day name. So select weekday and select day name until you understand the pattern, right? So for the weekday, 0 is Monday and 6 is Sunday, right? So Monday is the first day of the week, right? Sunday is the last day of the week, and it's kind of 0 indexed. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. For day of week, it is 1 is Sunday and the 7 is Saturday. So the way you can remember this is like the Western calendar, right? Where if you look at the calendar, the first column is Sunday, the last column is Saturday, right? And it starts with 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. But again, just remember one of them and it will help you out a lot. Okay. And the reason I asked you to use the numbers, right, and not just day name itself, is because in a lot of analysis, when you are filtering by, let's say, weekends or weekdays, or doing analysis on the days, numbers is easier to write a condition for than the actual string, right? So, for example, if I want to look for weekend versus weekday, right? If we're looking at weekday, right? The weekends are Sunday and Saturday. So we have 5 and 6, right? So we can just filter with 5 and 6, and then everything that's not 5 and 6, right? Similarly with our day of week, right? Our weekend is 1 and 7. So we can filter by 1 or 7, and everything that's between 1 and 7 will be weekday, right? Whereas if we're using the day name, we have to write out the words Saturday and Sunday, right? And then say everything that's not Saturday and Sunday for weekday, right? Which makes your query a bit longer and more prompt to mistakes because you're typing out 2 words instead of just 2 numbers. Okay. All right, so let's answer this question because we haven't answered the question yet, right? So I'm going to say which day of week had the most hires. Okay, so I'm going to include all 3. Okay, just so you can get a feel for it. Okay, but since we're looking at the number, right, we're looking at a count. Okay, so we're counting star, because you're counting everything. Okay, but if we do it this way, like it is right now, right, we have 3 columns and a aggregation column, which is a count. You either run into an error, okay, or if it does give you a value, it just gives you the first row with the count. Okay, so if you are having an aggregation column, okay, and you have other columns, you need to use a group by. So after your from statement, you're going to have a group by statement. And everything that's not an aggregation column, you have to put in the group by. Otherwise, it's going to give you errors. Okay? And this is also where the alias helps you a lot, right? So I can just say as day of week, as weekday, so I can say WD, and as day name, right? So I can say group by day of week, WD, and DN. So I can use the alias of the columns to refer to it in the group by. Okay, so with this result, we have the count for each of the unique values in these columns. And if you have multiple columns, it will be unique pairings, right? Just like distinct, right? But since these 3 are doing the same thing, right? We know that each row is just 1 weekday. Now, since we look at group by, there's actually another trick that you can use with group by. Instead of writing out the name of the columns, you can actually refer to it by their positions. Okay, so in our select statement, we have 4 columns, right? So day of week, weekday, day name, and day count. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 columns. In group by, we can use the position of the column to group by it instead of using the name. So instead of writing this, we can say group by 1, 2, and 3. And it'll give us the same result. Okay, so these numbers refer to the position of the column in our select statement. So if you have a projection, which is selecting particular columns, this will be easier to understand because you can see where the columns are and the position of them, right? But if you're using select star, it might be a bit more difficult, right? Because unless you remember the exact order of the columns in your table, right? When you do a group by 1, group by 2 with select star, it's looking at the first or second column in the original table, which might not be what you want to group by. Okay, so my recommendation is always use the column name. Okay, but if you have a select statement where maybe the column name are too long, you could use the numbers, but just remember that it's relative. Okay, so first column in your select, second column in your select, third column in your select. Okay. Any questions at this time? In that case, let's look at the next one, which is again a group by, right? So how many employees are in each department? So for now, we're not doing any joins yet. So we're just going to take the department ID as the department names, right? So I can do select department ID and then do a count star from employees and then group by, which day of week at, most hires, sorry. I'm missing one last part. Good catch. Yes. So the most hires, after do group by, do an order by. Okay. Order by, and then we do a count star, descending, because it's the most. Okay. So this is 3, or I believe this is Tuesday, right? Yeah. So thank you for that. So it's one last step that we have to do for this one. Okay. And similarly with order by, you could actually use the positions as well. Okay. But again, I do prefer to use the actual column name or give an alias. Okay. So in both group by and order by, you can use the relative positions using numbers. But I would say for transparency's sake, for people to understand your queries better, use the column names instead of just numbers. Okay. And any functions that you put on the column, give an alias to just describe what it is. Right? Don't use A, B, C, and D because that's not descriptive. Right? Use like proper names. Okay? Even like this WD is not a good name to give. Okay? All right, so now let's move on to question 6. Right, so how many employees are in each department? So again, we're using the department ID for this question. So doing select department ID, count star, and say as count, okay, from employees. And once again, we have an aggregation column and another column. So we need to do a group by. Okay, so group by department ID. Okay, and this will give us for each department ID how many employees there are. Now, if you're using other editors, the order might be different, but that should be fine, right? Because the order in a lot of SQL editors is the order that they appear in. Okay, so if let's say the first one here is 2001 and not 1001, right? Then your display might have 2001 on top and then 3001 next, because that's the next group, right? It might not be ordered by the group by. Okay, and that's okay. If you do want to order by the group by, you just have to add a order by, right? To make sure that this is ordered by the group by column. Okay. So the purpose here is to make sure that the numbers match up. Okay. The order might be different depending on the editor. Okay. The next one, is there any date? So we're looking for the exact date, right? Year, month, and date. Sorry, should be where more than one employee was hired. Okay. So we're going to do select hire date and then count star. And again, as count from employees group by hire date. Okay, I'll leave it as just for now, and I'll show you how to filter it. Right. So when we do the group by hire date, we see that a lot of dates, there's only one person, right? But there's only one here that is 2. Now we don't really want to do the scrolling, and even with the order by, right, we still have all these additional results, right? So this way of doing it, it works, but it's not preferred because we don't need these extra rows. Okay. So in that case, we want to filter them out. Now, when we're doing a filtering them out here, we're filtering not by the original column, but by a column that we created. Right? I want to filter by the count. Right? So it doesn't exist in the original table. It's a new column that we created. So to do that, we're going to use the having clause. Okay, so having. Now, having, you can only choose column, or you should only choose columns from the select statement. It does work with other columns, but it's not preferred. Okay, so if you are filtering based on columns that are not in the select statement from the table, use the where clause. So let's say I want to filter by the employee name, I'm using where because it's not selected, right? But if I'm filtering by a new column that I created in the select statement, I need to use having. Because the where clause only understands or only sees columns in the original table. Okay, so I'm going to do having count greater than 1. Right, more than 1%, greater than 1. And this will give me just this row, or just the ones that satisfy the condition. Okay, and I'll show you, in case you're curious, right, what happens if I use where instead. Right? So where count is greater than 1. Right? Because both having and where filters by the row. Okay, and let me take this away just so we don't see two queries. Right? This will give you an error. And there's two reasons in this query. Okay, first is the order. Okay, where has to come before group by. So when you're writing a query, where goes before the group by statement. So let's change that for now. So where count greater than 1. Okay, but now the second error that you're going to get is that count. So it says here unknown column count in the where clause, right? Because where only looks for the columns that exist in the table. Okay. So again, if you are doing a filtering based on columns that you created in your select statement, you need to use having, and having happens near the end, not at the end, but near the end. So after the group by statement itself. So any questions about where and having? Okay. No, I'm going to show you the this one, number 9. I'll skip number 8 for now because that one's pretty easy to do. Just know that there are a few aggregation functions that exist in MySQL, right? So the ones that are commonly used are count, sum, max, and min, and even arith, right? So you can use those aggregations the same way you use count. You can use it with the other 4 functions. Okay, so I'm going to do it number 9 to show you basically the same thing you would do with number 8, right? So what is max and min salary of each department? So we can select department ID, okay? Max of salary as maximum, min of salary as minimum, and then from employee. Okay, so here I have 2 aggregation functions, right? By themselves, this is fine. So if I take this away, this is fine. Okay, so you can have multiple aggregation functions in your select statement. But because I have this additional column here, right, this will not be fine. Okay, so anytime you see a column that's not an aggregation function, you need to have a group by. Okay, so just keep that in mind when you're doing it. And if you do see that error, right, don't freak out. You know what that means, right? You just forgot group by, or maybe you left out a column that should be in the group by. Okay, so it's a very simple error, very common error to find. And we'll quickly do the last one, and I'll leave it up for your questions. So the number of employees hired in each quarter, right? So each quarter, there is actually a quarter function in datetime in MySQL, but it doesn't always exist in other SQL languages, right? So if we do select, let's say quarter, hire date as quarter, and count start, I believe I'm counting the employee number of employees, right? From employees, right? And again, count is an aggregation function, but quarter itself is not, right? So we still need to do a group by. And this will give you, for each quarter, how many employees were hired. Okay. Now, in other languages where there is no quarter function, we'll talk about this later on, but there is something called a case when function. Case when is like an if-else statement in SQL, right? So we can use a case when statement and use the months function, right, to just write out the quarters ourselves. Okay? So we'll show you that in another session later on. Now, with the remaining 3 minutes, are there any questions you have about functions or about any of the queries that we run today? Yeah, so there are quite a few functions that do exist. We just don't have enough time to cover all of them. So I just chose the kind of basic ones, the string and the datetime functions, right? But there are functions for like concatenating. So that's one string function that we didn't do, which is joining two strings together. There are functions that are used to basically add and subtract different numbers, but you really don't need to do that, right? Those kind of things. Yeah, so we skip number 8 just because number 8 is similar to number 9. So that's why I just skipped it. Okay. Yeah, so there are other type of functions that do exist. So if you're interested, you can either do a quick Google search, but look for SQL websites or Stack Overflow websites. Those are good. Or talk to us, join our self-paced or our bootcamps to learn about other functions itself. Any other questions? Okay, so our plan for tomorrow is we're going to do some exercises in SQL. For those exercises, I'm going to use more than just we learned in these 2 days. So you might touch on joins, you might touch on subqueries, you might touch on case when. So that might be something that you don't understand, but I'll show you how it works. Okay. And we're taking a little pause with SQL. We'll come back in a few weeks and continue on with joins and subqueries and case wins in other Lens and Learn sessions. Okay. So if you don't know the schedule, make sure you contact Adam. He has all the schedules for you. Other than that, if you do have any questions, in the meantime, we will be posting them onto our YouTube channel. So you can comment your questions on the YouTube channel videos. We'll try to keep an eye on them and answer them on YouTube, or make a list of the questions and answer them in a future session as well. Okay. So with that said, thank you everyone for your time and have a wonderful